This is 1680 The Crow, and you're listening to our feature presentation.
My name is Jonah Jung for BCIT's The Crow, and welcome back to For the Record. As a student journalist, my passion has always been to deliver the important news to people in my local community. However, it is not as easy as it was these days for local journalists. Earlier this year, 3 local newspapers, Burnaby Now, Tri-Cities News, and New Westminster Record, got shut down by their parent company, Glacier Media, because of the financial difficulties. 4 former newspaper journalists in BC are trying to bring back local news to their community. Inspired by the campaign in Quebec to save 6 local newspapers, former journalists Maria Bartel, Janice Klook, Teresa McManus, and Cornelia Naylor are doing a campaign called Save the Local News. To know more about this, I spoke to Cornelia Naylor about their plan and her thoughts on local journalism.
The news ecosystem is shrinking, and so it's tough on a personal level, just in terms of employment, but it's even more devastating to think about when I started at the Burnaby Now. We had 2 newspapers in Burnaby, in New Weston, in the Tri-Cities, 2 newspapers, and they published a print product twice a week, plus the website, and we had things like blogs that reporters were doing, and there were a full newsroom, and even at that time it had been cut. So it's even more devastating to think about what's happening to local news just as an impact on society. Like, there's no longer anyone left to write about city council or school board or just events that are happening. So I mean, those are 2 things that have been difficult for us. The one thing that has made that a little bit, at least not shocking or surprising, is that our newsrooms had been cut so deeply by the time that the papers closed that, it wasn't like it was, it's a surprise, but it wasn't, it's like we'd been cut down to the bone already. So, yeah. To the point where there was 1 reporter left in New Westminster, 2 reporters in Burnaby, and we didn't have an office and that kind of thing. So, yeah, that's the long answer.
Thank you. So you mentioned local media outlets being shut down and local news journalism industry shrinking. And as far as the announcement goes, they said Glacier Media didn't receive enough funding to support those media outlets. What are your thoughts on the funding that is given to local news outlets? How can things be improved?
Well, they cited economic reasons. So when they say that there wasn't enough funding, they basically said that they weren't sustainable profit-wise. They're a corporation, and so they're not just dealing with one print product or 3 print products or 3 online outlets, because we were online at that time. I don't know if you know that, but we had the print product for all 3 of those papers died in 2023. So we were online only. So Glacier said that they had to shut down because of economic reasons. And we would argue that as a corporation, they have more expenses than just getting the local news to local people. They're owned by, they need to make corporate profits. They have to pay corporate debt. So it's not about whether a local newspaper is sustainable in the community. It's more difficult to make it sustainable as a corporation, because corporations historically are used to making large profit margins, and that's been going away for decades now. And so also we were the last, and I don't think this is insignificant, but we were 3 of the last union papers in BC, at least, I think, for Glacier. So that was, I'll leave that where it is.
Thank you. So you mentioned 3 papers, union papers, and so with the 3 outlets gone, how are people in Burnaby, New West, and Tri-Cities consuming local news? People are saying only thing that we have left is the press release from the city hall. So, how is the situation?
So we've been doing outreach since May, April, all summer. So we've been going to farmers markets and community events like the Canada Day event in New Westminster, Recovery Day in New Westminster. We've presented to city councils, and the people that have come up to us have said that they are just not getting that information. There's no information coming out of the city halls in those different communities. Nobody's writing about it. The city's putting out its own press releases, but that hardly sort of holds public officials to account. We only hear what the cities want to say, basically, what they want to make public, which is important in itself, but local journalism goes farther than that. So what community members are telling us is that they are just not getting that information, or they're getting some information online and they don't necessarily trust it. Or they have to go to find out what's happening in their communities. Just in terms of events, they have to go, different places on the internet to find out, what's happening in their town, but they have to go to multiple different sites, and a lot of people don't have time to do that, so they're just missing events. We've had some people say, I didn't know this event was happening until I walked past it. So they are basically telling us they are not getting news. They're not getting that news that they're used to, and that they miss it.
Thank you. So, as much as I miss the local news, you guys are running the campaign. So how many people have joined and donated to the campaign to save the local news, which might come to an end in 5 days on the website, as far as I know?
Well, that's part one of our fundraising campaign. We're ready to launch a second phase. We started this, I think, in June. It started as a GoFundMe campaign, and now we've moved to another platform called Chuffed. And I think we have, hang on one second. I think you can go to the website to find out how many people have donated. But I think we're either nearing, or we're definitely past 50,000, approaching 55,000, something like that. What was your question again? Sorry.
Yeah, it was about how many people have joined and donated to the program.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
I know. I can get that. It's on our. Here we go. More than 100 people. I know that much. It's like 130. That's in terms of the people who've actually donated. There are 4 reporters that are behind this initiative. I think that's something that's easily accessible online. So there are 4 reporters from those 3 publications that are behind this effort, and we're also getting a lot of support from an organization called the Union Cooperative Initiative. And they are an organization, they're a co-op in themselves, and their mandate is to incubate other co-ops. They came to us and said, this looks like a great opportunity to start a co-op, and they've been working with us on the governance piece, the fundraising, other things, just connections they have in the co-op community having to do with design and the website work. And our union, Unifor, the union that our union, when we were at those papers, because there were 3 union papers, has also stepped up to give us support, because our publication, our organization will be a nonprofit, independent news cooperative, and our members will be unionized. So all of those pieces are helping to support this effort.
Thank you.
Is that kind of what you wanted?
Yes. So
Okay.
one question is, what is the goal for this campaign moving forward in terms of saving local news and providing more information to the viewers and the readers specifically?
Okay. Well, we are on the very cusp of launching our website and newsletter. That should happen either this month or early next month. So we are going to start a new publication in these 3 communities, one publication to cover all 3 communities. Our ultimate goal is to bring back a print product. And so that's our goal for this organization, this particular initiative. Ultimately, we would like the co-op model, the nonprofit co-op model, to act as a model for saving local news across the country. We think that can work. We think it's sustainable. We think if we take out the profit motive, if we use a cooperative model that engages with the community and has real community support instead of a corporation that starts an endeavor and then pulls up roots whenever it's not profitable, that will make it sustainable.
Thank you. So one last question is, when you launch the print newspaper, and if
Yeah.
there's more support from the community, then moving forward from there, what innovations can be made in local journalism to help deliver the reliable information as the organizers said in the website for the campaign? What do you think
Sorry,
would happen?
I didn't get that last bit when you talked about the website.
Oh, so on your website it says this campaign is to help deliver reliable information.
Yeah.
And after you guys established that print newspaper, what kind of innovations can be made for local journalism?
I think, and maybe this is old-fashioned of me, when I think of innovation, I think of the model itself, because I think the biggest challenge from the 1990s on basically is to try to find a way to fund local journalism. And I think a nonprofit co-op model can achieve that. I think people want print. They like the idea of print, and it's not like an innovation so much as trying to address some challenges with innovations that have happened, like everything going online, everything being kind of an endless flow of information where there's never an end. I think there are people out there who want something finishable, and I think there's something, that appeals to more and more people going forward. Something finishable, something tangible, something a little less ephemeral than a news article that zips by in your social media feed. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think the innovation is the model, the model for governance and funding that we're trying to establish here.
Thank you. And I think that answers all my questions. Is
Mm-hmm.
there anything else that you would like to say to people who are interested in saving the local news and getting updates from local community?
Yeah, they should definitely follow us, and subscribe to our newsletter, so that we can find out more from them about what is missing in local news coverage and see how we can engage to meet that need. Also, I think you should look up, I don't know if you might have already done this in your research, but there's a couple of studies that were done at the beginning of this year that talk about local news and its disappearance and how that impacts society. Do you want to get the answer? I guess I could probably just email these to you. I think they're really good.
Absolutely.
There's a couple of things that might be interesting for your article, and I don't know how you'll go, like where you'll go with it, but one of the findings of these two studies is that local news particularly is suffering under corporate ownership, and the suburbs are especially impacted because I think people look to the center, like a Vancouver publication, to cover those outlying areas that are right around the city, but they're not being covered. City councils aren't being covered unless something unusual happens. That day-to-day local coverage isn't happening in Vancouver for Burnaby, the Tri-Cities, and New Westminster. According to these studies, small towns have fared a little bit better in terms of local news disappearance because they have a more cohesive identity and the community rallies around those outlets a little more fulsomely. So what we're trying to do here is make sure this doesn't happen in these suburbs, that they're not impacted the way this study is showing they're being impacted across Canada, that kind of thing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hope the campaign goes well. Have a great day.
Appreciate that. All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.
This has been For the Record, and my name is Jonah Jung for BCIT's The Crow. Thank you.
As inflation climbs, wages lag behind, and grocery prices surge, food insecurity is reaching critical levels across Canada. To understand the impact on frontline services, I spoke with Nick Johnson, Manager of Member Services at Food Banks BC, about whether demand has risen in recent years. He says the trend is not only growing, it's showing no signs of slowing down.
There's definitely a curve to this all. I would say it's an upward curve. So 3 years ago, if we're talking about 3 years ago to now, the percentage increase is quite significant. I'd have to quickly pull up some percentages to get very specific, but there was definitely a major upward curve in usage and requests for service from about 3 years ago till this last year. There still is an upward trajectory. However, the curve is starting to slow down. Now, the why, that one's a little bit trickier to understand because when we look at the economic situation, obviously price of living continues to go up. So you would expect that maybe the curve would continue in that steep incline. However, according to our numbers, and it's kind of an asterisk on that, like we're a membership of 111 members. So we really only have the data that our members provide to us. But there's so much more food security work that's happening out there in the province and all the communities that make up BC. And so anyways, back to the point of 3 years ago till about this last year, it was about a 25% increase year over year for those 2 years. I think we're looking at about an 8 to 10, if I'm not mistaken, for last year to this year, given the data that we have from our members. So it is starting to slow down, but it is still an increase.
Got it. And then I guess my second question that you kind of answered already, which can be, so many different things, was what are some of the main factors contributing to the food insecurity? But you kind of, touched on that, how there could be so many things. I've got, housing costs, stagnant wages, inflation. So your answer would kind of be just there's a multitude of reasons.
Yeah, it's a spider's web of, it's very complex. Some of the data tells us that at least provincially speaking, the highest percentage of food bank users are those who are working, either full-time or part-time, holding down some kind of job. So I think that, that speaks to, yes, folks are doing what they can. This might be a wage thing. I know a lot of these folks might be working for minimum wage or just above minimum wage, probably not a livable wage. But, so they're still working, but they still can't, make ends meet, afford the cost of living. So it is a cost of living situation. I think forever it's been a disability and income assistance rate issue as well, never really keeping up with what it costs. It's a housing piece, provincial government and other entities promise affordable housing, but it's never really able to keep up with the demand and those who need it. And so it's a myriad of things, but ultimately it is a financial piece. If folks had the finances to afford the home that they live in, to pay for the groceries that they need from the grocery store, their gas, their insurance, whatever it might be, if they were able to afford basic living costs, they would not be showing up to food banks. We would not need to exist. So,
Right. There's definitely a multitude of things, and also adding to that list, grocery stores gouging and all that kind of stuff as well is a huge part of it. And then, so given on the statistics and your data that you might have provincially, can you comment on who are the people most affected by food insecurity, and has that demographic in your statistics changed over time?
Yeah, I would say that, coming back to the statistic on working families or working households, where that's the primary source of income for their house, that has increased over time. I would have to go back into the historical data, which I don't have in front of me, but I do know that has been an increasing number over the years from the data that we have. Whereas I hate to, go on the record, and because I would like to be as specific as possible, but even prior to 5 years ago, I'm quite confident that prior to 5 years ago, those who are on long-term disability would have made up the kind of the largest percentage of those visiting food banks. They're on that fixed income. Employment is a difficult thing to hold steady because of what the disability that, they're working through, whatever that might be. However, working families have eclipsed that. So it is a myriad. I think, if I'm not mistaken, those on disability is like 19%. Working families is somewhere between 23 to 25%. Then there's those who are on income assistance and those who are on EI, and there's a kind of a number of ways that those demographics kind of make up the 100%. It is a myriad. It's not like one is 60%. There is certainly a balance to the visitors that are coming to food banks across the province. So when it comes to who are the most vulnerable, I think it's hard to say. It's really just this one group. It is unhoused. It is those who are, unable to make ends meet. It's a myriad. It's hard to actually say like it is specifically. These are the most vulnerable. If I were to give an answer to that, though, just from the gut, it is those who are working with less flexible income to go by to cover costs day to day, week to week.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that definitely makes sense, and that you're probably right. And then so a follow-up question is what are the biggest challenges that the food bank faces in trying to meet this growing demand? Food supply shortages, funding, space, staffing. What would you say?
Yeah. There's a real divide between urban and rural food banks. That's pretty, at least what I see when I chat with members. I'm the manager of member services and liaise with 111 members that make up our membership and know them decently well. If you're in a very large city like Vancouver, typically you've got a larger donor base to work with. Those who can afford to live in Vancouver often have maybe a little bit deeper pockets, can give to the cause. Not always the case. There's vulnerable folks and those who maybe don't have those means in every community across the province. But if you're living in an urban center, typically there is more access to funding and donor bases, those who are living in your community, versus, someone like in Grand Forks, small town BC, smaller population, still a high level of food insecurity, lots of visits to their food bank as well.
Mm-hmm.
Infrastructure, so they've got this kind of a smaller food bank to work with, which means that they can't necessarily buy in bulk, or at least to the bulk levels that would see huge amounts of, cost savings, because, it'd be great to buy a pallet of pasta. I would get a great deal on that, but I don't have space to hold a pallet of pasta and a pallet of beans and a pallet of all these things. So space is an issue, especially for a lot of rural, smaller food banks. And so what they're hoping for is more of a regular cadence, that shipments can be made in smaller quantities, but there are very few suppliers out there who can do that in a timely and
Where does most of your food come from, and are those sources becoming more or less reliable? I know you were just talking about shipping and in bulk, so that was my next
yeah.
question.
Yeah, there are, in 2021, 2022, especially after the atmospheric rivers happened, highways being washed out, there's all sorts of stuff going around at that time. And I would say that at that point, there was a huge disruption in the logistics supply chain. However, I feel like most of that we are overcoming. So when it comes to food purchasing, there are some food banks that will place orders through their local grocery store. So a lot of, obviously, every food bank, I don't know of a single food bank that isn't purchasing food.
Mm.
And when I say that, let me backtrack that a lot of food banks do really great from donations, like, there's a food drive, or, groups come together and donate a bunch of food. But food recovery has been, especially since 2018, been a huge staple for food banks, and prior. But in 2018, that's kind of when the floodgates opened, and a lot of corporate partners like Pattison Group, a lot of their chains and Loblaws, et cetera, really kind of got over what had been a liability concern for some time. What if they see the Best Western branded meats and someone gets sick? Although there is what's called the Donor Encouragement Act, which, releases them of the liability as long as there's no ill intent in that transfer of food over to a food bank or a charitable organization like a food bank. 2017, 2018 is when things really opened up, and corporations, partly it was a corporate social responsibility thing and other reasons as well. But food banks started to see a lot more food flowing through, stuff that wouldn't sell, but was still really good for human consumption. Still had some dates on it, or it was closer to, best before date, but still was great to be given out and was safe to be given out. And so a lot of food banks started to rely on that. I will say that as time has gone on since that point in time, grocery stores are getting a bit better with the data that they have, which affects their purchasing, which affects, maybe not having as much to give away. A lot of corporations are, just trying to think, I think this would be an example, and most have kind of their own app, but Loblaws, if I'm not mistaken, has one called Flash Foods, where instead of it just kind of, where historically would have just gone out in food recovery, gone out to a food bank or a food charity, now it's kind of being marked down at 50%, and they're trying to recoup as much cost as they can before it either goes to the landfill or goes to a charitable organization. So that, grocery stores are getting a bit better in the way that they are ordering and purchasing, which on one hand is great, maybe reducing food waste, and food security is a thing where maybe the person visiting the food bank is asking for that 50% off meat. So not to poo-poo the system, but it is affecting food banks, I think, in a pretty big way.
Right.
And then obviously the inflation that, the province is feeling we have heard from food banks that they're not only is their financial donations are decreasing, but so are their the physical food. So it is the food recovery. It is, the folks who maybe would do a food drive prior, but maybe not anymore.
That was my guest, Nick Johnson, the Manager of Member Services for Food Banks BC, and I'm Isabella Vertone for BCIT's The Crow.